Throughout the early to mid 90s, the beat 'em up was one of the main staples of gamers' diets. While Final Fight wasn't the first beat 'em up, it did set the standard for what was to be expected of that genre. Then Streets of Rage came along, and not only being the first beat 'em up made exclusively for a console, it also surpassed the expectations set by Capcom's Final Fight. So by the time the 5th generation of gaming came, was it time for this genre to go 3D? And who would take the first crack at it? Capcom? No. Sega? Still waiting on a 3D or even a 4th entry into that series. But did you know there was almost a 4th Streets of Rage game made by Core Design for Sega? It was meant to be an exclusive for the Saturn. That didn't quite work out, so it was renamed and called Fighting Force. They say being first to the goal is all that matters, but in gaming that's not always true. There have been plenty of game series that weren't first to the goal in their respective genres, but because they came in 5th or 6th place were better games because of it. With Fighting Force however, they weren't trying to better the beat 'em ups of the previous genre, but bring it into a whole new era of 3D gaming. And because of that, it often gets misunderstood and unfairly criticised. Fighting Force is an interesting game for many reasons, and its history is fascinating, if a little tragic. So for this week's episode of Michael's Retro Game Reviews, I'll be reviewing Fighting Force for the Sony PlayStation. Fighting Force upon initial release was met with mixed reactions from critics and receiving above average scores. It seems even by this early point in the 5th generation of gaming that critics, and gamers to a certain extent, start to expect more than just 3D offerings of what was acceptable in the previous generation. This is what I love about retro gaming. In the past, every 5 years or so, everything is shooken up, and developers are forced to innovate and take chances with new ideas. Can we say that about gaming now? So we get that this game was hated by the critics, but how well did it fare with real gamers? Despite what the press thought, this game was still embraced by gamers and becoming a favourite among the gaming hardcore elites. Even with bad reviews aside, plenty of gamers still bought Fighting Force, so it was still a commercial success for Core Design. I can't find sales numbers to back this up, but the fact that Fighting Force got a sequel is evident of it. I imagine because of the negative reviews, most gamers first tried Fighting Force by renting it. That's how I first tried it all them years back when I rented it from my local video game shop. And I did enjoy it, but I wasn't in a hurry to commit to a copy at full price. And judging by the fact this game was almost always rented out of my old local video rental shop is further proof of that. It was only for this review that I finally bought myself a copy after winning it in an eBay auction for 99p with £2.50 postage and packaging. At £3.49 you really can't complain even if it was a bad game, and that's another reason why retro gaming rocks. Still, with its half decent yet simple and repetitive gameplay, it was a good throwback to the beat 'em ups of the previous generation. And let's not forget this game's dumb story. Dr. Z was expecting with the rest of the world for it all to end on the dawn of the new millennium. The signs were there, but for whatever reason it never came to pass. And when that didn't happen, Dr. Z, instead of being happy, he got angry and thought to himself, something must have gone wrong. I know, I will bring about the end of the world myself using my vast resources. That has to be one of the dumbest reasons in the history of video games for an evil mastermind to want to end the world. I can't understand that you might have some bad guy that wants to take over or even end the world, and not really having any other good reason other than he just feels like it. It's just one of them things you don't try to quantify and just accept. But with this game they try to give a reason for everything that's happening, and unless it's done well, it has the misfortune of achieving the exact opposite and destroys the ignorance is bliss mentality. But if you like a story with your game, even if it's a bad one, then feel free to immerse yourself in the world of Fighting Force with its whole 2 pages in the manual dedicated to it. I'll pass, thanks. Whether you choose to indulge in this game's story or not, you're now ready to dive right into this beat 'em up. And as a beat 'em up, it's competently well put together with most of the bells and whistles you would expect from this type of game. You start off from the character select screen with 4 characters to choose from. One of the biggest complaints this game received was that it didn't matter what character you chose to play with, as they all pretty much play the same way. That is so not true, and anyone that actually completed this game to the end with more than one character could tell you that. Both Mace and Hawk are your middle ground type characters, and good all-rounders for dealing with most situations. They have their own unique strengths that makes them as characters stand out. Mace is a little faster than Hawk and has slightly more faster powerful kicks, whereas Hawk has more powerful punches. And while his kicks aren't as fast as Mace's, it controls a lot of the space, which is useful when surrounded by a lot of enemies and you just want to tell them to, hey, back off. Then we have Alanna, who is the speediest and youngest member of this team. While the weakest character, she more than makes up for it with her speed. She can easily whiz around enemies, and controlled by the right player can be an effective character. And finally we have Ben the Smasher Jackson, who is a beast with anger issues. Due to his sheer size, he commands presence. Smasher can leap forward, knocking all enemies in his path down, and he's the only character that can throw engines from smashed up cars at the baddies. He's the slowest character, but his sheer strength and presence makes him a force to be reckoned with. Each of these characters has their own special move that costs health to use, so use it wisely and don't overuse it unless you want to see the game over screen. Another complaint this game received was its lack of lives and continues. Let's start off with the continues, and yes, you do have them, it's just you don't start off with them, and as you rack up your score you earn them. And when you earn something, doesn't it feel more rewarding? And about the lives, yes, it's true you don't have any, but to be honest, I think it would have made this game too easy if it had a life system. I was able to complete this on my third try using only one continue on medium difficulty. I imagine at one point there was a life system, and if the game testers of Fighting Force were of the same opinion as me, they would have said, lose the lives. With all the health packs, sandwiches, and various other unidentifiable health pick-me-ups, you should be able to keep your health topped up. The best one is smashing the Coke machine to release cans of Coke to replenish your health. Doesn't this remind you of Two Crude Dudes? Classic game. The one thing this game succeeds at more than anything else is giving that modern action movie feel about it, where your environment and everything in your environment is your weapon, and the key to getting through this game is to use everything to your advantage. At the beginning of the game in the parking lot after you beat up the first wave, notice the truck? Well, if you smash it up, a rocket launcher pops right out the back. Pick it up and use it on the gate instead of beating it down, and after blowing up and leaving a nice big gaping hole, use the remaining 3 rounds to blow up the enemies that will come after you. And once you run out of ammo, throw it. This is just one example of using a weapon in this game to your advantage. Just look around for guns, baseball bats, axes, police truncheons, and whatever else you can find to give you that edge. A common fault with most games is reusing the same assets over and over again. I like that in Fighting Force every location is distinctive and with their own unique enemies to beat up. This has the effect of keeping your eyes peeled to the screen to see what other cool stuff you're gonna see next, and with multiple paths you will have a reason to keep revisiting this world. This next bit might sound strange as I've been praising this game, but did anyone feel that this game lacked style or even its own unique identity? What I mean is, when you play old school beat 'em ups, what do you expect? Unique gameplay, larger than life colourful graphics, and a pumping soundtrack that just gets you in the mood to beat stuff up. The graphics in Fighting Force are good, but they lack any style flair to them. What's the biggest thing that separates Streets of Rage and Final Fight? Their own distinct visual style, and to top it off, they both have an awesome soundtrack. The soundtrack in the PlayStation version of Fighting Force isn't really anything special. Although it does ooze atmosphere, it's the only good thing I can say about it. What's strange is the N64 version has a much better soundtrack, and that was on a cartridge. The tunes in the N64 port still lack any decent melodies like with the PlayStation version. Without a few decent tunes in the mix, this game falls short of what is required of a beat 'em up. Imagine Streets of Rage without its amazing soundtrack. I think if Fighting Force had a decent soundtrack it would have helped to give this game an identity, but instead it just felt like a generic beat 'em up that just happens to be in 3D. It's still a good game that just happens to fall short on the last hurdle. I imagine core design will more focus on bringing this genre into the realm of 3D than trying to do anything drastically new with it. Remember at the beginning of this review I said this was almost the 4th game in the Streets of Rage series? Well, time for a history lesson on why that never happened, and while we're at it, let's find out about the N64 ports, the sequel, and the cancelled 3rd game. So how did core design for a short period of time came to be working on a 3D Streets of Rage game? From the research I've done, I present two possible reasons. The first was that Sega themselves approached core design with the intention of them making a 3D fourth entry into the Streets of Rage series for Sega's newest console, the Saturn. This explanation gets thrown out there all the time as to why core design was working on the series, and I honestly doubt that's the reason. Sega had more than enough resources to make them themselves, and why would they trust such a key franchise of theirs to another company? In the past, they have outsourced some of their franchises to other companies, like they did with Sonic on the Master System and Game Gear, and the same with the Mickey Mouse Illusion series with Aspect developing Land and Legend of Illusion themselves. Even so, Streets of Rage was such a hit in the past for Sega that I honestly doubt they would go to another company and ask them to make the fourth game in the series for them. The second possibility, and the one that holds more water, is that core design themselves developed and pitched to Sega their take on the Streets of Rage series. I'm guessing Sega was impressed, and as they had no immediate plans for the series themselves, they decided to grant core design the Streets of Rage name with the understanding that this game would be a Sega Saturn exclusive. Sometime after this agreement with Sega, core design saw how well the PlayStation was selling compared with the Saturn's lackluster sales, and with the N64 just round the corner, they decided to make Streets of Rage a multi-platform game to maximise sales. That has to be one of the most stupid things you could ever try to do with a game licensed from a hardware manufacturer. Because of this, Sega stripped core design of the Streets of Rage license. I understand why core design wanted to bring this game to as many platforms as possible, as the limited sales on the Saturn, offset by the development costs, would have made what would be by this point now an untitled game not viable on the Saturn. After the debacle with Sega, Fighting Force was ported to the PlayStation and later released on the PC. But it seemed Core hadn't completely burnt its bridges with Sega, or Sega of Europe to be exact, as throughout the development of the Fighting Force game, they were still working on the Saturn version, and that might be the reason why Sega of Europe was set to release this. There was some kind of falling out with core design and Eidos over this game. I imagine this was because of the whole core design wanting to make Streets of Rage a multi-platform game, and for putting Eidos in the middle of all this. The last thing Eidos would ever want to do is burn bridges with anyone, and that might be why they still released Fighting Force on the PlayStation and PC, but passed on the Saturn and N64 releases. I also have another theory. Did you know that Tomb Raider, which was also made by Core Design and published by Eidos, came out on the Saturn before the PlayStation or PC? Sony saw how popular this game was and its marketing potential for its new console, and so an exclusivity agreement was made with Sony and Eidos that lasted up to Tomb Raider 3. Now, this shouldn't have affected any of Core Design's games outside of the Tomb Raider series, but I imagine great care was taken not to rock the boat with Sony, and that's why I believe the Saturn port was to be released by Sega of Europe and the N64 one by Crave Entertainment. The Saturn version was finished and a complete build was sent to Sega of Europe to be published. But for some reason the game was pulled during early marketing of the Saturn release. Trying to find concrete proof that Sega ever tried to promote this game wasn't easy, but I did find one advert that was in a French gaming magazine that clearly shows that Fighting Force was supposed to come out on the Sega Saturn at some point in the future. Rumour has it that only one review copy of the finished Saturn port was sent to the official UK Sega Saturn magazine. For whatever the reason, the Saturn release was cancelled by Sega, and that's a shame. From looking at this early beta footage, you can see that the Saturn version looks and runs much smoother than the PlayStation port. But again, this was originally meant to be a Saturn game. So this would have potentially been the best version of Fighting Force. You can see this game went through many changes. Do you notice the Streets of Rage style text in the corner of the screen? Yep, this version of the game still shows some signs that at one point it was a Streets of Rage game. But sadly this was never released on the Saturn, and that was the end of that tale. In '98 development was finished on the N64 port, but because of Core and Eidos falling out, or the exclusivity agreement that Eidos had with Sony, or whatever the real reason was, this game was shelved for the best part of a year. That was until '99 when the game was picked up and released by Crave Entertainment. This version of Fighting Force was slightly improved with better graphics and now a life system. But it was too little too late by this point, and Fighting Force 64 faced the same criticisms that the PlayStation version received. Everyone agreed by the time this came out it was out of date, and had Eidos released this in '98 like they originally supposed to, would it have done any better? Who knows? But releasing this in the same year as the sequel didn't help. It received even worse scores than the first Fighting Force and angered fans of the series. If it weren't for the name of this game and that the main character from this was also a character from the first game, this could have been its own thing. Also, you can't really call this a beat 'em up, it's more like a third person action game. This is an easy game to play, but chances are you'll lose your interest long before you ever complete it. What's funny is Hawk, the main character, is now a gangster. Look at how he shoots everything in true gangster style. In 2004, Fighting Force 3 was announced for the PlayStation 2 and Xbox, and then cancelled in the same year. And what was the reason behind this? Well, Core Design went bankrupt, and along with them they took this series to the grave. From looking at this very early footage, you can tell they weren't very far into development. So, my final thoughts. This series tried to bring this genre into a whole new era of 3D gaming, and as a game I don't think it failed, but in its attempt to do what it set out to, it was a success. The beat 'em up didn't die with this game, but was reborn in the next generation as the hack and slash genre. Now, as this game goes really cheap on eBay, why not grab yourself a copy and relive an interesting piece of gaming history? I give Fighting Force on the Sony PlayStation the thumb of approval. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.